Hey everybody, and welcome back to the next in our series of webinars. Thank you so much for watching today. In this webinar, I want to talk about 6 commonly made teaching mistakes we should avoid making. So let's go. So the first mistake I want to talk about is not talking too much. So as teachers, when we're in the planning stage, it's important we try to make the lesson as student focused as possible. So when we're planning and we're looking at different activities, we should ask ourselves, okay, should this be an open class activity where the students are giving information to the teacher, or could I make this a pair activity where the students can first discuss the questions with each other and then the teacher can receive the feedback. And now I know there are students who will be perfectly happy to sit there for the duration of the class and listen to the teacher talking. But the reality is, our students will benefit the most and will improve more quickly if they're given the opportunity in the class to practice the language. So really, as teachers, our role is to facilitate that by providing an environment our learners feel comfortable using and practicing the language in. Now, of course, we can be there to model the language, to set up the activities, and to deal with any misunderstandings and doubts. But really, we should try to put as much of the focus onto the students as we can. Okay. The next point is um, right. So not even the teacher knows everything. Even the teacher's knowledge has some limitations. So what this means is, eventually we're gonna be in a situation where a student is gonna ask us a question and we just don't know the answer, or we're not 100% sure how to answer the question. So when we find ourselves in these situations, I believe it's important that we don't try to answer the question if we're not sure. So instead, what we can do is we can say, "That's a wonderful question, really, really good question. Um, I'll have to get back to you, and we'll talk about that in our next class." Alternatively, you could say something like, "Oh, that's a great question. Why don't you do a little bit of research tonight for homework, and you can tell us about it tomorrow?" Or we could even avoid this problem completely. Um, if we take the time to prepare our lesson carefully, and if we ourselves understand the language, that means we'll be in a position where we can deal with questions about the content of the lesson. And if we're faced with a question that isn't related to that particular lesson, that we're not sure of the answer to, we can just respond with, "It's a wonderful question, but today we're really going to focus on this, and we'll talk about that in another class." And in my experience, the students usually respond well to this. And like I said, it's important we don't try to answer if we're not sure, because what can happen in these situations is, especially with higher level classes, the students can sense if the teacher isn't completely sure, and if they see you're trying to answer and you give them some information that isn't 100% accurate, the students may actually lose confidence in you. And as the teacher, once the students lose confidence, it can be really difficult to get that back. So just to emphasize, don't try to answer a question if you're not sure of the answer. Okay, much better just to concede. It's a wonderful question. I'll have to get back to you, or why don't you do a bit of research and tell us about it tomorrow, or we're gonna focus on this today. We'll have a look at that in a future class. Okay. The next point is don't rely on improvisation. Okay, so a great lesson requires good planning. So, what good planning actually does is it will give you, the teacher, more confidence going into the lesson, and as a result, you'll find it more enjoyable. Now, yeah, of course, experienced teachers will know there are some situations where it can be really beneficial to improvise. So if you find the students are completing an activity more quickly than you anticipated, of course we can improvise here in this situation. We can adjust our timing, or introduce an extra. We look forward to the lesson more, and we actually enjoy it more. And of course, the students can see the confidence the teacher has, and they'll feel a lot more comfortable and satisfied in that situation too. Okay. Unfortunately, not all English classroom textbooks are riveting page turners. Unfortunately, sometimes they contain activities that are not the most engaging, or even the most logical. So when we're planning, if we're having a look at the textbook and we see an activity that we think, I'm not so sure that will go well with my students, don't be afraid to adapt, or to supplement. Um, the textbook, it can provide a really wonderful framework. Um, Examples of the language, practice of the language, etc. But it doesn't always present that language in the most interesting way. So it's good to have the courage to actually experiment with it, introducing some of your own ideas to the lesson. So generally textbooks use the kind of PPP method, present, practice, um, produce. So sometimes in the original stages, they'll use an article to introduce the language, but these articles, they may not always be the most relevant or interesting to our students. So we could have a look online, see if we can find another article, a more engaging article to use as a way to introduce this language. Another thing about textbooks that I've found is they don't always contain the most logical progression from one activity to the next. So again, have a look, and don't be afraid to rearrange some of the activities if you think the lesson might flow better, or if you think it might progress more logically from one activity to the next. And the more you do this, the more confident you'll become at doing it, and you'll get a good sense for what works and what doesn't work. And as a result, your lessons will become a lot more engaging and enjoyable. But it's important to have this confidence to experiment a little bit, to find what really works for you and your students. Okay. So I'm sure we've all been in a situation where no matter how much we explain a particular point, it just seems like one or more of the students aren't getting it. They're not understanding. And when we find ourselves in this type of situation, it's really important that we don't lose patience with the students. So what can happen is we get a little bit frustrated that they're not understanding, and we explain it again, and they're not understanding, and we explain it again, and they're not understanding. And the reality is, most of the time, if a student isn't understanding something, it's because the explanation wasn't um, wasn't good enough for that particular student. So what we can do when we're faced with these situations is, instead of just repeating the same explanation again and hoping that they'll understand, we could try a different approach, try a different way of explaining the language. We could elicit some more examples. We could use some images to illustrate, or we could even encourage some of the stronger students in the class who do understand to contribute to the explanation and to assist. We could also use some leading questions to provide some scaffolding to help the students arrive at an understanding. Okay. The final point I want to talk about today is rapport. So, as a teacher, we can have a desire, to be very friendly with our students, to always try to, keep them happy, keep that friendly dynamic going, and as a result, maybe we can be a little bit afraid of, setting clear boundaries in the classroom. You can't do that. You must arrive on time. No use of the first language. No mobile phone use, and we can be afraid to really enforce these rules sometimes because we're afraid it might damage our relationship with the students. And what I found in my experience is, um, if you want to have truly great rapport with a class, respect has to come first. And the only way the class will respect you is if you have the courage and the confidence to enforce the rules and to set those clear boundaries, and to enforce them equally for everybody. So first, respect, and then the rapport can can come afterwards. Um, Guys, thank you so much for watching. I know I've certainly been guilty of making some of these mistakes in the past. I'm really curious about you guys, what your experience has been. Can you think of any other frequently made teaching mistakes, and ways that we can avoid them? I'd love to hear what you think. I'd love to read about it. Please feel free to leave a comment under the video, or in the chat. Also, I'm a teacher here in Dublin at Erin School of English. Now, if you'd like to learn more about Erin School of English and the kind of experience you can have here with us in Dublin, if you look in the description of the video, there's a link to my colleague Larissa, who will talk to you more about that. So, again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this series of webinars useful, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Cheers. Thank you.